We begin with this Fox News alert. We are awaiting President Trump, who right now is on his way to New Orleans, where he will speak at the American Farm Bureau's annual convention. That speech comes as the longest partial government shutdown in our nation's history just hit day 24. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner. Here today, Melissa Francis, national security analyst and newly minted Fox News contributor, Morgan Otegas. Oh, I love that. You gave her a little high five. Democrat strategist on the other side of that high five, Fox News contributor as well, Leslie Marshall. And in the center seat, co-host of Fox and Friends, Fox News radio host as well, Brian Kilmeade. And an author. And, well, you may not be newly minted, but, you know.
But he's minty nonetheless.
Thank you very much.
Minty and fresh.
Minty
I love
fresh,
it.
like Scope.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Goodness gracious. Let's hit the news.
Yeah, let's do it.
The president speaking to reporters before leaving the White House just a short time ago, he's still calling on Democrats to come to the table and make a deal to reopen the government, even though close allies of the president have urged him to declare a national emergency to build the border wall. Watch.
I'm not looking to call a national emergency. This is so simple, you shouldn't have to. We should get on with our lives. The Democrats are stopping us, and they're stopping a lot of great people from getting paid. All they have to do is say, we want border security. That automatically means a wall or a barrier.
Republican Senator Lindsey Graham suggesting Democrats are being hypocritical on the issue of a border wall.
Every Democrat that I've worked with for about 10 years now has agreed to funding for barriers/walls on Obama's watch, on Bush's watch, and all of a sudden it's a bad thing on Trump's watch. It really does perplex me how you expect this to end when you tell the President of the United States you can't get you get $1 for a wall, when in the past Democrats have appropriated billions for the wall. What is he supposed to do? Just give in? He's not going to give in.
Democrat Senator Tim Kaine doubled down on opposition to funding a border wall, but claiming that Democrats are ready and willing to fund border security.
What we don't want to do is waste taxpayer money on a vanity project that's ineffective, that the president said Mexico would pay for, but spending massive amounts on border security to keep us safe. Dems do it over and over again, and it's been Republicans that have been blocking it.
All right, look up at your screen right now at these numbers. A new ABC Washington Post poll shows while a majority of Americans do not approve of building a border wall, the numbers are moving now in the president's favor. 42% of Americans supporting a border wall, up from 34% a year ago. Brian Kilmeade, why do you think that is? Why is the needle moving toward the president?
Well, a couple of things, Harrison. Thanks everybody for having me on. I think a couple of things. Is the word wall, fence, barrier, slats? So I think if you say wall, 2,000 miles, solid brick, that's not going to work. But I think the question has got to be, do you support a barrier, various barriers throughout the southern border? Would it be even higher? Number one, I think the president's done a pretty good job illustrating the problem. Number two, the world is happening. Caravans are real. The officer being slain by illegal immigrant is real. The drug numbers, amount of people dying every day is real. These are real news stories that all play into the southern border. So he doesn't have to come up with things.
You know, Melissa, I want to hit with you for just a second before we continue going around the couch. Some of the journalism that was happening over the weekend. So I invite everybody to look at NPR as they were interviewing Border Patrol agents, and some of them saying, as Brian has suggested, that there is part of the equation that includes a barrier. That's a word that we keep hearing. Yeah. You've been hitting the semantics of the conversation. Where do you think they are now?
I think that the president has moved the way he talks very significantly. It would probably be helpful to the situation resolving it if he took the word wall out of his vocabulary. He's not going to do that because he's not like that. But he still mentions fence, etc., more often than he does wall now. I think that people in general understand that it is a combination of things. I mean, don't we all get that there are slats, there's fences, you need security, you need drones, you need more people down on the border, that if you have slats in one spot, the people know, Border Patrol knows where to go, and, you know, it may drive people around the fence, and so then you can put Border Patrol at that side. Right. I mean, there's a whole host of things, if you're logical about it, that we need, and I think Americans get that. But when you say wall, it brings it back to a political fight.
Well, and it is that political talking point that both sides are using now,
both
Democrats
sides.
And Republicans. Here is Senator Chris Coons, a Democrat from Maryland, on the border.
I personally don't think that a border wall is in and of itself immoral. It would be great if we could reach a resolution to our country's broken immigration system and find a path forward we all agree on to invest in border security, in new technologies and approaches that would actually make us safer.
Well, it was interesting because that actually aired yesterday before you said what you said, but he kind of said what you said, too. So there seems to be, Leslie, some room for agreement here. Can they get there?
I don't think so. Not right now. I mean, at some point, they're going to have to see. At some point, they're going to be affected by the polls. And even though you said there are more people supporting it, still a majority of people don't want the wall. They're blaming the president. They're blaming the GOP and not Democrats. But Democrats have to be careful, too, because the tide can change. What Senator Coons said, I agree with 100%. I don't think it's immoral. I don't think it is effective. To your point about comprehensive, in Pennsylvania, we had a plane that came in with a drug shipment. We found a tunnel in California that goes from the United States to Mexico. These are not addressed with drones. These are not addressed with a wall. And to your point about the semantics, it's not just the semantics, although that certainly comes into play. Sure. It is whether there is an entire border wall, an entire wall for the entire border versus
who don't think that would be possible, though?
And fences and being repaired now and some being reinforced
with the video that we saw, because you didn't even have to see where the president went. You could just see other video that was B-roll and some of the coverage of the Rio Grande. Oh, look, they're putting up a map for me. Thank you, guys. Of the Rio Grande area where he went. In McAllen, Texas. You can't put a wall up there. I mean, nobody has thought that that were ever going to be the case. But I get it, Morgan. When the president was on the campaign trail, the wall was that word that he used that galvanized this idea of that kind of protection. But in reality, it wouldn't happen that way anyway.
Well, I think the president is starting with last week to take back the messaging front on this.
Can you take back 2 years of messaging?
Well, but no, I'm saying in terms of as it relates to the shutdown, meaning that so he's sort of being much more proactive on that. I mean, one of the things that I would have done over the weekend is I would just sit there and tweet out every picture of every member of Congress that's in Puerto Rico.
Well, he did tweet, but he didn't tweet about that.
Let's talk about the now, and this is something Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez should care about. Let's talk about the lobbyists that paid for that vacation. How many lobbyists were there? How many PACs were there? I mean, talk about corruption as its finest. We have people, one of my very good friends who's an FBI agent, over the weekend, 2 babies, 1 on the way. His wife doesn't work because she's taking care of the 3 kids, or the 2 and 1 to be on the way. And he said to me, Morgan, you know, I'm hoping that I can get some reserve time duty to pay for this while the government is shut down. Meanwhile, you have people that are in Puerto Rico on the beach having cocktails. And so that's where I think that this is where I have a problem with this, because estimates, the S&P global ratings are saying that if this goes on for another 2 weeks, that we're going to lose $6 billion in the economy. That's more than the wall. So you're saying they could have just
cut the check for 5.7. Can I just slide this in? And I want to get your thoughts on this, and you too, Brian. So you've got this trip down to Puerto Rico. Not too long ago, we were talking about a situation that was so dire for them. Is this an economic decision among Democrats to go and help out? I'm really curious, because I know what the need is on the ground still in Puerto Rico, and maybe something like this pops up.
Well,
as an opportunity for that? I don't know.
Realistically, it's twofold. Is it economically? Yes, trying to help the people of Puerto Rico? Yes, but Puerto Ricans want Puerto Rico, the Commonwealth, if you will, of Puerto Rico, wants to be a state. Obviously, these people can vote. They vote more so Democratic, and the Democrats are looking to reinforce that sector.
All right, let me scoot in here. I know I said your name, but we'll have to wait till next topic.
It'll be worth it. I'll stick around.
Oh, you'll stay?
Yeah, I'm going to stay.
He's going to stay. All right.
Just decided.
President Trump is hitting back at 2 big reports over the weekend that he pushed to conceal the contents of his communications with Russian President Vladimir Putin on one page. Flip the page. That after he fired FBI Director James Comey, FBI officials launched a counterintelligence probe into whether the president was working on behalf of Russia. Now the president is going after what he calls, quote, corrupt former FBI officials. Details and analysis debate ahead.
I think it's a disgrace that you even asked that question, because it's a whole big fat hoax.
Fox News alert. We are awaiting remarks from President Trump in New Orleans after earlier today he criticized former FBI Director James Comey. This coming amid fallout over a New York Times report that FBI officials launched a counterintelligence probe after Comey's firing into whether the president was being influenced by Russia. The president today slamming the report.
I never worked for Russia, and you know that answer better than anybody. I never worked for Russia. Not only did I never work for Russia, I think it's a disgrace that you even asked that question, because it's a whole big fat hoax.
But Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren says the report is raising big questions.
I've been waiting for a long time for Mueller to kind of move forward. I think we're seeing these independent actions, even independent of Mueller, which is the lead up and some of the rationale about why this investigation started and why so many Americans like myself have been concerned for so long.
That looks like Mark Warner to me.
Yeah.
But anyway, Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live with the latest. John.
Elizabeth Warren, Mark Warner, politicians under the category of W. I mean, you know, the president, when he was on with Judge Janine, 9 o'clock on Saturday night here on the Fox News channel, said it was ludicrous, the allegation that he was involved with Russia somehow, and that there should be an FBI investigation of it. But he did not definitively say no, which led to his critics, like Mark Warner and others, saying, well, listen, the president had the opportunity to say no, and he didn't. So you saw the president in the South Lawn as he was on his way out to the helicopter today, issuing that flat-out denial, and at the same time pointing to the people who were leading the investigation at the time he fired James Comey, which sparked this discussion. Listen here.
The people that started that investigation are McCabe, who's a proven liar and was fired from the FBI, are Lisa Page, who was forced to leave the FBI, and her lover, Peter Strzok, who we got their text messages, and what they said in those text messages was shocking when you talk about bias, and also Comey.
Well, some Democrats, including Mark Warner of Virginia, say the discussion among FBI leaders as to whether the president was acting on behalf of Russia when he fired James Comey increases the importance of the Mueller investigation being allowed to continue. Former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie says the whole thing plays in the president's favor. Listen here.
It backs up his narrative. His narrative is that FBI agents were acting in a rogue manner, overstepping the normal course of business because they had something against him. And that story is an extraordinary story, that they would open a counterintelligence investigation against a president of the United States. And I think it backs up some of the narrative the president has talked about.
The president also dismissed a Washington Post article over the weekend that said that he kept translators' notes from his July 2017 meeting in Hamburg, Germany with Vladimir Putin, suggesting that there was some reason why he was keeping those notes from his aides. The president talked about that today, saying, no big deal. I have these one-on-one meetings all the time. And by the way, it wasn't just the president and Vladimir Putin with their translators. Rex Tillerson was there as well. So, Melissa, somebody else knows what went on in that room.
John Roberts, thank you for all of that. Now, we're gonna get to that bit with the translator in the Washington Post in a second. But, Brian, I want to start with what was in the New York Times. And I think the takeaway point from this, for me, seems to be that it means that this investigation was begun as a counterintelligence investigation as opposed to a criminal probe.
But it's not where it ended up. And they
counterintelligence, but that's also open-ended and can just sort of go on endlessly and gives them all kinds of powers.
So the way they describe it is a sense of panic within the FBI because they noticed that the RNC platform was changed. They noticed the president has called for Russia to take hey, Russia, if you're listening to me, get those 30,000 emails that Hillary Clinton mysteriously lost. And then the Lester Holt interview happens in which he says, yeah, I won this whole thing with Russia is a big hoax. What they don't bring up is the second half of the Lester Holt interview when he says the answer to that question. He doesn't just talk about that's why I fired James Comey. He said to end the investigation, he says it might even lengthen out the investigation, but I have to do the right thing for the American people. You would think if the FBI was trying to do such a comprehensive look at what the president might be up to, they might have played the soundbite all the way out. And the lastly was on the 5th paragraph. It said, no evidence has emerged publicly that Mr. Trump was secretly in contact with or took direction from the Russian government officials. So I look at this thing was like a best of all the things you suspect, which is the worst of Donald Trump, rather than something new.
I mean, you're a surveillance, counterintelligence, security expert. How did it read to you?
Well, I think what we've seen clearly here is that during the Obama administration, you had a sitting presidency that was spying on an opposition campaign. Now, why did they do that? They said publicly that it's been through Carter Page, or they swore in the FISA documents 4 times that they believe this Steele dossier. But I think what we're seeing here, and Andrew McCarthy of Fox News pointed this out, is that the FBI and this investigation is basically finally admitting that Trump had been their target all along. And that's what you're seeing here. For me, I never totally understood, other than the obvious policy differences that the president had with President Trump had with President Obama at the time. What we've never been answered is why the FBI, why they were so obsessed with looking specifically into President Trump, assuming that there was a connection. So that's something that's never been released. I don't know if it will be in this Mueller investigation or not, but it was clear that all of these disgraced FBI officials that have resigned or have quit since this began had an agenda from day one to investigate the president, and we're still looking for why.
But Leslie, wouldn't Democrats say with good reason? I mean, maybe if they were looking right at the president from day one, is that the smoking gun, if you look at it from the other side, that they were suspicious of him, so they looked into him?
Look, we knew, and they knew, and they were looking into, as Mueller has been tasked with, the interference by the Russians with our election and our process and, the American process, our democracy. And I think that there was a legitimate concern upon the FBI. I don't think it was just, political partisanship and hatred for this incoming president. I think when they looked at it, they said, is this going to interfere with the inquiry that we have into how much Russia did or may continue to do in the future? And I think that they were looking truly to connect those dots.
Harris?
All right. I'm actually going to tie this into the next topic. The White House is now pushing back against a Washington Post report that the president went to great lengths to hide details of his conversations with Russian President Vladimir Putin, including reportedly on at least one occasion taking possession of his own interpreter's notes. The White House says the details of these meetings were not hidden. And a counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, says the president had a reason to be careful with sensitive information.
That was a time when there were tremendous leaks, including from when the president would have meetings in the Oval Office. And I can recall early on 2 calls with foreign leaders, I believe Mexico and Australia, that leaked, the contents of which leaked almost immediately. So there was great suspicion that some people were obviously leaking this.
Democrats are now saying they may call the president's interpreter to testify before Congress. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff tweeted this: last year, we sought to obtain the interpreter's notes or testimony from the private meeting between Trump and Putin. Republicans on our committee voted us down. Will they join us now? Shouldn't we find out whether our president is really putting America first? Brian, do we have any doubt that these translator notes might have gone from the president, that he may have actually taken them away?
Well, we haven't heard the president's explanation. When I asked Kellyanne Conway, she hasn't talked to the president about that this morning on Fox and Friends. But a couple of things. I think we're going down a very tough road for the future. If you have to get the notes of the interpreter and interview the interpreters of all these world leaders, they're there to interpret, not to analyze. All of a sudden, you're going to put them on the national stage to tell everybody what they believe what the president meant when he was talking to President Xi, President Modi, or Vladimir Putin. I think it's terrible. Also, there's a little bit of a pattern here. What is this? What is the same thing we have in common with President Xi, Kim Jong-un, Modi, and of course President Vladimir Putin? The president likes to do things one-on-one. He always has. They all met behind closed doors. There hasn't been a problem. The problem is with Vladimir Putin if you want to identify a pattern.
Okay. And I ask about those notes because Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin was defending the president, Morgan, saying that, and I believe he was referring to the grabbing of those translator notes, saying that the president was really trying to prevent leaks that were rife in his administration.
That wouldn't surprise me at all, considering, as Kellyanne Conway said this morning, what we had at the time. Listen, if this person becomes before Congress, this translator, no world leader, whether it's President Trump or whomever comes after him, is going to feel confident having a private conversation with an American president. I mean, you might as well put everything on the television cameras because those conversations have to be confidential. What is different here, as the Washington Post pointed out, is there appears to be about 5 different meetings with President Putin that there is no official record record for. Now, typically, those would not only be, well, those type of notes would not only be top secret, they would be classified at multiple levels. What's really problematic is that people within the intelligence community or somewhere within the White House keep feeling compelled to leak these notes. So I think that we need to understand, why there aren't classified notes on this. And I'm sure the president, his secretary of state, his national security advisor are getting debriefed after these.
Bottom line, does it warrant an investigation?
I don't think it warrants an investigation. I think the president can and his advisors can easily explain this to us. But, you can't, if you can't have a private conversation with the president of the United States, no matter who it is, Trump or anyone else, the next Democrat, then no president, no world leader is going to meet with them.
So, Leslie, early on in the administration, when we talk about leaking from the White House, remember those phone calls that the president was having with leaders that were leaking too? It wasn't just things that translator notes and all of that. We didn't have that drill down on the detail. But Democrats are looking for what here?
Democrats are looking for answers, but I have to say, I think they're doing the wrong thing with this, because I don't think that the investigation is going to yield anything.
You don't think it warrants an investigation?
I think it's political theater, which Democrats have been very critical of Republicans when they were in power in the House for doing investigation after investigation. I don't feel that's what the people who elected so many Democrats to come into the House to take power want. I don't think it's going to yield anything, but I do think I don't agree with you, Morgan. I think it's problematic when you have 5 meetings over a 2-year period and we have nothing, especially with Vladimir Putin, because of the Russian meddling and the ongoing investigation by Robert Mueller.
When Brian says, because I want you guys to talk this out together, because it almost sounds like you're saying similar things. When you say there's a trend and it's with Russia, you're right.
World leaders, too.
Okay, but you said specifically Russia.
No,
listen to what Leslie is saying, though.
Yeah, what I'm trying to say is this is the way the president likes to do things. And as Chris Christie also said on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, he said this is the president who stood on the podium and says, I am the one to do it. I'm uniquely qualified to be able to do this. So why wouldn't he say, hey, India, come over here. I got to talk to you. Why wouldn't he say, President Xi, we got to get a trade deal together. And we're going to do it at Mar-a-Lago without anybody else around.
I want to address what Adam Schiff said, because Elijah Cummings said something very similar when he said, is the president working for America or for himself? I would just quote some of Fortune's statistics, because I don't think people realize how much money the president has lost by virtue of being in office, by his brand being politicized. $400 million since he took office, according to Forbes, a lot of that from licensing losses, $50 million on his properties around the world. The implication is that there's a deal between these guys for him to make money in the future, to have a tower in Russia, and this and that. His brand has been so politicized that he's lost a lot of money by virtue of being in office. So I just wonder, factually, when people make those charges about money, look at sources like Forbes and do the math.
Leslie?
Well, I've seen reports that he's lost money. I've seen reports that he's made money. I would trust Forbes. I would think, quite frankly, anybody in the presidency is going to lose money. And
isn't that how it's designed?
But they should. They should, because they should. Right. They should be making money personally. They should be focused on running the country. But I don't think how much money he's made, still comes back to this issue.
What's the implication? When they're saying he's making deals behind the scenes with Russia, it's generally about that he's trying to make money. He's trying to have the tower, and the point is that by virtue of being president, he's lost money.
All right,
I'll be very quick. I'll just say, if we're going to open up the can of worms to looking at presidential meetings, I'd like to know what the Obama administration was doing to work against Israel at that last vote at the UN. I'd like to know what the Obama administration was saying to the Iranians. If we're going to start opening up presidential meetings because we disagree with policy, then there's a whole lot as it relates to Iran and Israel that the Obama administration needs to be held accountable for.
All right. 2 new faces in what is looking to become a very crowded Democratic field for 2020. Why the president says he likes his chances as he takes a swipe at a familiar foe. And big hearings kick off tomorrow for the president's nominee for Attorney General. The criticism coming from Democrats now, and the Senate's top Democrat calling for the president to withdraw the nomination of William Barr.
I still believe, after the revelations about Mr. Barr's unsolicited memo, President Trump ought to withdraw this nomination.
So we are getting a sneak peek at the testimony of President Trump's nominee for Attorney General ahead of William Barr's hearings in Congress tomorrow. This could be contentious, as we all remember the harsh partisan battle over Judge Brett Kavanaugh's nomination for Supreme Court. Democrats are expected to press William Barr over his past criticism of the Mueller probe. Here's top Democrat Dick Durbin, who sits on the Judiciary Committee.
Well, I'm worried about it. I mean, clearly he's a good lawyer, no question. But when it comes to this delicate political situation, the power of the presidency, whether this investigation is warranted, Bill Barr had better give us some ironclad, rock-bottom assurances in terms of his independence and his willingness to step back and let Mueller finish his job.
New Judiciary Committee Chairman, Republican Lindsey Graham, believes Democrats' fears over Barr are overblown and says Barr has told him that he has a high regard for Mueller.
I'm going to ask him, do you see any reason to fire Mr. Mueller based on what you know now for cause? Do you trust Mr. Mueller to be fair to the president and the country? Will you make sure he can finish his job? If you get the report, will you be as transparent as possible? I've asked him those questions, and I'm very comfortable with his answers.
In the meantime, William Barr releasing excerpts of his testimony on the issue of the special counsel. Barr writes, quote, "I believe it is in the best interest of everyone, the president, Congress, and most importantly, the American people, that this matter be resolved by allowing the special counsel to complete his work. If confirmed, I will not permit partisan politics, personal interests, or any other improper consideration to interfere with this or any other investigation." Leslie, is that satisfying?
No. I mean, I would expect him to say that. He wants to get confirmed, and he will be confirmed, by the way. I mean, obviously, the president's not going to pull him. He's not going to go, oh, I stepped down. But there is a concern among Democrats, and I think there's a concern maybe among people who are independents or Republicans as well, that he was biased. 19 pages that he sent to the Department of Justice in June, in which he said...
Well, lawyers write a lot.
Well, that's true. Okay, I'll give you that. But fatally misconceived, it just seems like too much bias, and that's a concern. That would be a concern for me, and not even from a partisan level. But like I said, it doesn't matter. The numbers aren't there. Republicans have a majority in the Senate, and he's going to be confirmed.
So Andy McCarthy and a couple others have made the point about that fatally, what was it? Sorry, misconstrued, saying that that was about a portion of what they're looking at, the idea that it can't be obstruction when he's carrying out the duties that are his as president, but that was only a portion of the probe, and overall, he feels like, as he said now, it should go forward.
William Barr will be probably the most valuable player, the most competent, experienced player in the administration entirely. To get him and want him to do this again, they're extremely lucky. He's going to staff with all very competent people that know how Washington works, a little bit more traditional. I don't think, if he recuses himself, I think it'll be a folly. But you're allowed to write commentary and give an opinion when you're in the private sector. He was. My goodness, there's no way. You should treat this guy with respect, ask him good questions, wait for him to actually answer, don't pontificate, and can we go back to business as usual? I mean, you're right to challenge in this electric, atmosphere, but still.
But not even, I don't know if you'd see it as a challenge. I mean, I spoke with Robert Ray on my show last week, and of course he took over for Ken Starr at the end of the Clinton investigations. And so what he said was that there is a responsibility to ask him the questions about the Mueller investigation. And a good attorney would see that and put it in a statement. So what have we seen today? I mean, an attorney who kind of assumed it and was ready for that question. But Ray told me, no, it's imperative that we find out and get him on the record. He said that's what all good attorneys do. You say they write a lot, Morgan. But in this instance, part of what they should be writing, because of the recent criticisms of even the interim person, Matthew Whitaker, part of what they should be writing is the answers to some of those questions that Ray said that both Republicans and Democrats should ask.
Listen, tomorrow should be a should be a snooze fest. Barr is totally qualified.
Yes.
I mean, he's completely qualified. I think that you'll see the 2020 candidates who are on the Judiciary Committee, Senator Harris, Senator Booker, potentially. You know, they can't just let the guy through. They're going to have to make waves. But I don't predict that this is going to be anything like Kavanaugh. I mean, what's the alternative? The alternative is to have the acting attorney general, who Democrats have said is totally unqualified to continue to run the agency when they know that the Mueller report is coming down in the next few months. So the best thing for everybody, Republicans, Democrats, and the American public, is to have someone incredibly experienced like Barr at the table. Anything that you see tomorrow is pure posturing for 2020, does not relate to his achievements at all.
You know, Leslie, real quickly, how much difference does it make for Democrats to know that their predecessors, well, some of them may have still been around, but at the time their predecessors, when Barr was confirmed unanimously, thought on both sides of the aisle he was ready and the right person for the job?
I think there are a lot of Democrats that still feel that way, but they do have these concerns. And like you said, he has to
just
speak on the record. Yeah, they will. But remember, they also have a responsibility, seriously. I mean, left and right. You have a responsibility when you're a minority leader in the Senate or majority leader in the Senate or majority leader in the House to ask the questions. That's what is expected by your constituency and by your party.
But Senator Schumer said he should just be withdrawn. I mean,
that's political. That's the political rhetoric.
Right.
I mean, he knows it's not going to happen. Excuse me?
Don't you expect more from a leader than that?
No, I think that's part of what he's doing is leading the charge for his party and what his constituents want to hear. And I think that it's fair because they're saying, look, we have problems with your wording and your criticism of Mueller and this investigation. And now you're going to head up the DOJ and the questions have to be asked. And his opening statement speaks to what we're going to hear later.
More Democrats throwing their hats in the ring for 2020 with some fresh faces entering the fray while President Trump slams the Dems' highest profile potential rival. Whether the expected large field of primary candidates will help or hurt the party and who might stand the best chance against President Trump, we'll debate next.
The 2020 Democrat presidential primary race continuing now to take shape. In fact, during the commercial, Leslie Marshall said, didn't it start the day after the midterms? Former HUD Secretary Julian Castro threw his hat in the ring over the weekend. Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii says she will run with a formal announcement coming this week. BuzzFeed News reports on Saturday, New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand told a closed-door meeting that she will run for president. Senator Elizabeth Warren made her first visit to New Hampshire, making her debut in Iowa as a likely candidate the week before. Meanwhile, President Trump went after another potential contender, former Vice President Joe Biden, when he called into Judge Jeanine Pirro's show over the weekend. Watch.
He was always a 1%er. He was a 1% guy. He ran 2 or 3 times. He never got above 1%. And then Obama came along and took him off the trash heap. Then he became a vice president, and now he's probably leading. He's weak. Yeah. So we'll see what happens with him.
Leslie, how popular is Joe Biden among Democrats, considering how often he hasn't been able to advance?
After that interview, even more popular.
Right.
He is very popular, and I've said it before. I've said it to you on air and off air that
is winning popular because he hasn't been able to do it now. What's changing?
I think that his personality is the type of personality that could go head to head with the president's personality. Oh, Melissa and I agreed.
Yeah,
you have that in paper.
agree.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, of the field, what do we want? Democrats, that is, to make Trump a one-term president. I think Joe Biden's the guy, and I think the fact that the president specifically has called him out means that over this large and ever-growing field, he might be the guy that...
I asked about the winning portion because I wanted to know what had changed. Because, sometimes when you run multiple times, people are like, wait a minute, isn't there someone else? I said, what's different? What's different? Donald Trump.
Yeah, Donald Trump is different. I do think he has the right personality to go head-to-head with the president. I think the things that have handicapped him in the past are the gaffes, but now we're in a totally different kind of time where gaffes don't hurt you as much as not being able to fight. I've said it before, I think Joe Biden is Trumpian in a way that they have the same kind of style.
No malarkey.
Of going head-to-head, and I do think that I feel like he has the best chance, but I think that there are so many people on the left that folks would get excited about that it should be a big, huge field, but in the end, he probably has the best chance.
So, Morgan, I thought about this, and I know a lot's been said about likability and recognizability and how you want to be high in both those categories and focus groups and whatnot, but authenticity is the game, too. And people feel, and they feel, I should say, reportedly in polls,
that's a great
point, that they know Joe Biden. Like, there may be a gaffe coming that might surprise them, but Joe Biden, they feel like they know. They feel like they know President Trump.
I'm going to go out on a limb here. I don't think that there's any way that Joe Biden is the Democrat nominee. It doesn't mean that I don't think he's qualified. He certainly is qualified. He's very likable. I like him personally. I just don't think this is where the energy of the Democrat Party is at all. Let's just wait and see once he announces what Bernie Sanders and the Bernie Bros do to him, what Elizabeth Warren does to him. I mean, Trump's not even going to get to go near him because I think Warren and Sanders are going to go after him and anyone else who's a centrist Democrat.
Guess who else agrees with you? President Obama. This is going to be a second chance to endorse him, he's going to pass. You heard what he said in Hawaii. They need fresh blood. He wrote in his book to Joe Biden that it really hurt him kind of when President Obama said you can't beat Hillary Clinton. And now he knows something about Joe Biden that nobody else knows. Well, they're friends, but maybe he knows he can't handle the job.
He picked him as his vice president. I would think he'd know a lot more about him and his management style.
I don't think new blood doesn't necessarily mean Joe don't run. It could also be a slam to Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and others that have just been around a long time.
He seems like he's going to support Beto, and Oprah looks like he's
real quickly
Beto.
Before we move on, though, Tulsi Gabbard, some of the others who've gotten in, Castro, your
very impressive. She's got a military background. She likes to go and see places up close and personal. She certainly has a mind of her own. Take her own party. She takes on her own party pretty regularly.
LGBTQ background, bad words about that whole community, and certainly a very negative reaction left and right regarding Syria. I think she has a lot of problems, and we were talking about, what did I say to you guys? Yeah. I don't know what party she's part of. If you listen to her, it's very confusing sometimes, and I think that will be confusing for voters as well.
All right, this is not confusing. We're going to move on. New reaction now from the Pentagon after officials were reportedly shocked at requests from the White House late last year, providing options for a strike on Iran. But one former top senator says the U.S. should always be prepared. Watch it.
I think what John Bolton did in asking for military options for the president, who always will make the decision in the end, was rational.
The president has just touched down in New Orleans, and we are awaiting remarks for him at the Farm Bureau convention that is going on now through Wednesday. This is a group that has been caught in the middle of this battle with China. For example, 60% of U.S. soybeans are bought by China, and obviously that has been a big challenge for those farmers as this trade war with China drags on. So we'll be looking for comments there, and we'll bring them to you when they happen.
Well, fallout continues from a bombshell report by the Wall Street Journal that John Bolton and President Trump's National Security Council asked the Pentagon last September to provide the White House with military options to strike Iran. The request reportedly came after Iranian-backed militants last year fired multiple mortars into Baghdad's diplomatic quarter, which is home to the U.S. Embassy. The National Security Team conducted a series of meetings to discuss a forceful U.S. response, which left some in the Pentagon reportedly, quote, shocked and dismayed. But former Senator Joe Biden says the National Security Council's actions make sense. Listen here.
Think about it. Iranian-backed militias, extremists, fired mortars in the vicinity of our embassy in Baghdad and our consulate in Basra, Iraq. It was a hostile act. And if you let a country like Iran get away with it, they'll do it again. So I think what John Bolton did in asking for military options for the president, who always will make the decision in the end, was rational.
That was actually Senator Lieberman, who I've traveled to Munich with several times. Brian, you and I are the national security nerds here at Fox. We really get into these things. I sort of laughed at this report that the Pentagon was shocked and dismayed. I don't think that's possible. I think this is another frivolous leak. Part of the job of the National Security Advisor is to prevent a variety of options to the president, and the Iranian small boats were harassing and intimidating our ships in the Persian Gulf. Full stop.
And the president said, hey, why are we letting this happen? Shouldn't we send a message and blow them out of the water? And General Mattis, Secretary of Defense Mattis at the time, was blown away. No, you don't want to do that. Well, why? And he just kept pressing why. That's what you do as a leader. For John Bolton not to provide options for the president, he wouldn't be doing his job. It doesn't mean he necessarily has to hit. But when something happens, shouldn't you have plans ready to go, the targets, judging by the severity of the actions? To me, it makes total sense. This is a non-story.
Melissa, do you think that these leaks happen just simply because everyone's convinced that John Bolton would like to go to war with Iran? And quite frankly, the president has changed his strategy quite significantly from the Obama administration as it relates to Iran?
I think one of the problems is, and on a larger level, that the president upsets the order of things everywhere he goes. And that is what made him so popular with the people who love him. And that is what makes him scary to the people who don't love him. So when somebody says to him something like, that's not the way it's done, or you just don't do this, that makes him persevere more and want to know the answer. And in a lot of situations, I guess if you have a basic faith in where he's going, you like that. And if you don't, it's terrifying.
You know, I just want to draw our attention now back to the live picture, which we're sharing a screen with now, because in just a few seconds, we anticipate that the President of the United States is going to exit Air Force One and come down those stairs. And so that may happen in the next few seconds. I wanted to draw our attention to this. As Melissa mentioned, he's in Louisiana to deliver remarks at the American Farm Bureau Federation's 100th annual convention. Chances are, and look, there is the president. Chances are he will talk about the trade deals that he's trying to bring forth right now, and steel and so many other products in effect there, but the farmers have really felt it, soybeans, so on and so forth. And in the midsection of the country had cried out as the president was pressing forth in his dealings on trade that they were starting to feel a pinch very early on. Money put aside for them now has gotten stuck in this cogged partial government shutdown. And so will those dollars come is the big question in time to rescue some of these farming community business people. And the president there getting into the motorcade. He is in New Orleans, and boy, do they have a lot to celebrate after the playoffs this weekend as well. I'm sure he'll get a earful about the NFL playoff win by the Saints.
So
but meanwhile, they're going to talk economics, and we're going to follow this as it happens. Stay close.